Well, let me make people obviously join us as we go. I'll make a quick introduction. For those not familiar with myself, my name is Nick Bay. I'm CEO and founder of JGA Recruitment Group. We specialize in human resources and payroll recruitment. I'm also the host of two very popular podcasts, which is called the Payroll Podcast and the HR L&D Podcast. And I also run a regular weekly show on LinkedIn called the Listening Lounge, which you may have caught up with in the past. I'm joined today by Ted. Over to you.
Yeah, and if you haven't listened to the Listening Lounge, then do go and find it. There's some fantastic login details on the recruitment website. Very well worth it. Loads of fantastic content in there. My life currently is as an HR consultant and an author. I've written a whole series of children's books, but most importantly, probably in relation to this, a book about the world of human resources, a practical field guide, an A to Z. I've worked in the past as a HR director, vice president at Glaxo, and then at some small biotechs, and more recently at the Medical Research Council, which is in the public sector, and the Wellcome Trust, which is in the third charity sector.
Amazing. Now, for those that have just joined us, we have got a running poll, which is on your right-hand side. So if you have a chance to answer that, that would be great. That will help us direct the conversation to give you the most value. And just to give this a little bit of context, I don't want to focus too much on COVID. There are so many webinars out there about COVID. We want to give you some things to take away and utilize. But just to help set the scene, a recent CIPD survey, COVID-19 survey, noted that employees are working increasing hours at the moment. Meanwhile, furloughed employees are becoming increasingly anxious about returning to the workplace. There's obviously a lot of people that have lost their positions due to this crisis as well. And as a result, there's a significant amount of anxiety in the workforce, not just among those that have lost their jobs, but also those who have retained them, but remain concerned that they might be at risk next. Now, subsequently, job insecurity remains high. And actually, the CIPD survey said that 14% of employees who are still employed stated they believed it's likely they might lose their job as a result of the pandemic, with as many as 45% of furloughed employees saying the same. In addition, 55% of furloughed workers in June stated their financial security had worsened since the onset of the pandemic. Now, according to a McKinsey report, around 7.6 million jobs, or 24% of the UK workforce, are at risk because of COVID-19 related lockdowns. Now, as an HR recruiter, I've witnessed firsthand the challenges that HR professionals and others are faced with at the moment. But I'm also here to tell you that with the right mindset, the right tools, the right knowledge, you can still get ahead. Opportunities absolutely do exist. HR talent is still very much in demand and companies are still recruiting. That's the positive thing. And me and Ted want to be really positive today. We want to show you how you can get ahead, how you can get noticed, how you can rise above the noise, how you can achieve success no matter what the economic circumstances may be all around us. So we want to be positive. That's the only thing I really want to talk about in terms of negativity around COVID. There's other webinars doing that in a lot more detail than we want to do. So we're here to show you how you can get ahead. And we're going to start with some questions between each other, have an open conversation. But we also want you guys to be involved as well. So if you have a question you want to post, please do put it in the chat box and we'll try and answer those as we go along. Interestingly, the poll at the moment is about 50-50 for those seeking a new position versus those that aren't. So that's quite handy for us because we've prepared a webinar that will hopefully help those employed and those who are seeking a new position as well. Ted, anything you want to add?
No, just I said it right at the beginning. I'll repeat it because it is important. If you've got a question about something that we say, maybe one of us has used jargon or slipped into a mode that you don't understand, please ask. The chances are someone else has got the very same question. So we won't think anything little of you or whatever, just ask. And if it's something that's more private, then we can pick it up afterwards. If you work through Nick, he can link me, or you can link into me. I have a Dear Ted column on LinkedIn. I actually am very happy just giving free advice, and then I put a generic answer up for everybody else to be able to read later. So really do want to make it practical and helpful for you, not theoretical.
Great. I echo all of those sentiments as well. So let's get into the detail. What I'd like to do is start with your expertise, Ted, because you're someone who, as you've mentioned in your brief, works as an HR director level, and you mentor a lot of people as well, both pro bono, and you give a lot of support and a lot of advice in the marketplace. From your perspective, how has the pandemic affected the people that you're mentoring at the moment?
I think it's moved over the period. So at the beginning, it was a level of interest and excitement because a lot of HR people suddenly realized they were in the spotlight for the first time for ages, and that line managers were looking to them for advice and help, and they were having to find stuff. But as the months have gone by, the people I've been mentoring, and it is about 50 that I loosely mentor, this is just people who call me up whenever they want to chat and talk stuff through. They've been getting to the point of exhaustion in many cases, an unrelenting workload, setting up one set of furlough and then pulling it down and replacing it with a job scheme and then changing that and doing all of the rest. So it's been a tough period. And I'd say of the group I'm talking to at the moment, about 2/3 are in that employed category, but just thinking, when am I going to get a proper break and a holiday? And then there's another third, sadly, that have been let go. They've been made redundant. A lot of them have been working in the sectors which have been most affected. And I'm working with them at the moment in terms of looking at how you think about that next process of getting your next job. Because some need, you know.
The actions that you would recommend as an HR director are obviously going to differ to the actions that I would probably recommend as an HR recruiter. So what are some of the actions you've been recommending to those individuals who are looking for work, or for those that are anxious in their current roles, to help keep, you know, a real positive approach to the job security and the job search process?
Yeah, I think the biggest single piece of advice that seems to go down best is to say to people, right now, this is your project. You need to actually think of putting a project plan together and thinking about how you're going to use your time, because it's very easy for time to just slip by, or for you to get lethargic or feel depressed and anxious. If you give yourself a target each week of a certain number of things that you're going to achieve and do, and set that out, it can give you the structure which you're now the job of work. So that in those early phases, I often suggest that it's not great to go straight in, especially if you're feeling still a bit angry about having been made redundant. It's much more important to just talk it out with lots of other people. So reconnecting with people, getting back in touch with people you haven't spoken to for a while, saying, hi, how are you? Would you like for a short Zoom or a chat? And it's about starting to talk about it, get used to talking about it, understand and realize that actually being redundant in this day and age is quite a normal thing. There's nothing bad about it. It doesn't suggest that you're a lesser person as a consequence. And then going for it in terms of your project plan, you know, getting your CV sorted out, thinking about how you're going to operate and work with agencies, and then moving forward from there. And I think sometimes you see those people coming to you, don't you, saying, help me. So from your perspective, how would you help someone who just comes to you and says, Nick, you used to work for me and help me get people, and suddenly I'm looking myself? Yeah,
well, we've got lots of challenges at the minute. I think some of the people we're dealing with are struggling with isolation. They're struggling mental health results of that. They're struggling just with the increased demands of a reduced workforce, and therefore they're working extra hours, dealing with furlough legislation, which seems to change every second. And then, of course, dealing with the anxiety of either potentially losing their job or threats of redundancy, or indeed have lost their job. So lots of challenges out in the marketplace. There is lots of things to be positive about as well. I think, yes, it can be daunting if you're new to this process. And let's say you have lost your job through the pandemic, and you suddenly look at a new job and you realize that there's 300 applications that hit that job in the first 24 hours. It can be really daunting for people to know where to turn, what to do, how can you get noticed, how can we rise above the noise to really, you know, show that we can deliver something, to show that we can add value, to show that we still have value. And I think sometimes people are questioning that at the moment because they feel like they maybe lost their job, or they're under threat of losing their job, or they're not getting the support they used to get because everyone's stretched. I think there's definitely a bit of a cauldron of pressure arising at the minute. And of course, it's an old cliche. Best thing to do is to talk about it, is to network, is to use the community around you, which is vast. If you're on like LinkedIn and old colleagues, ex-colleagues, people like myself and yourself, Ted, lots of people out there offering support. When you start tapping into those networks, when you start asking people for support, it's amazing how much support is actually out there to help you in your next, whatever it is you're struggling with, whether it's isolation or whether it's looking for a new position, or whether it's just additional workload. I think there's also additional pressures from the tech companies now who are kind of jumping in, going, right, now you're working remote and you're still, if you are still employed, now's the time to do a transition. Now's the time to do a transformation. Now's the time to do X, Y, and Z. And it's too much. It's too much. So, you know, being able to take a breath as well and just go, right, what is it I want to achieve? And whether you're looking for a job or whether you're employed, having an idea, having a plan, and reminding yourself of the goals that you want to achieve, and then setting out about how you're going to achieve those is absolutely critical at the minute, because it's so easy to be head down and you forget then to lift your head and actually strategize for yourself. So busy helping others or trying to keep the wheels turning that we forget about ourselves, and that's when things can start to go a little bit south.
Yeah. So, Nick, one of the things that I get, obviously, with people looking for help and support when they're looking for a new job, either because they're in a job and they just want to move, they need to change, or because they've been made redundant and they're looking. Yeah. One of the first things they always want is some support with CVs. And I have to say, I've seen some horrendous CVs in the HR community. And I think it's like the cobbler's children don't have good shoes. It's the HR teams just don't have good HR. What are the tips that you can give us as to how we can best present ourselves to you? Because at the end of the day, you might be the person who can help us find a new job. So how do you want us to work with you in terms of our CV and our approach to you? What's the what makes you go, this is great? This is a really good HR person. I want to help them.
Glad you asked. And actually, we've had a comment from Alex in the chat as well, also saying, how can we stand out? How can we approach the application interview process? Certainly, we need to separate those two things out. And I think we'll get to interviews a little bit later. So let's start with CVs first. And I'm quite passionate about this. Number one, please, if you're on this webinar and you are tempted because you are panicking about your CV or your application process, please don't be tempted by these CV writing companies. For me, they are people who want to make changes in order to demonstrate value. They're not necessarily making changes to help you. That's where they create their value. They have to make change to show that you've paid and they've delivered something back. I would please avoid those companies if you can. They'll take your money and you won't necessarily get a product that's going to help you any more than what your CV looked like before you started. So that's the first thing. I have a bit of a bugbear about that. From my perspective, now I've probably seen over 1 million CVs. I've done recruitment for over 20 years. I've seen it change. I've seen what people look for change. And it does mean that we're able to, I guess, have a good idea of what looks good on the CV and how to position it. I do think a CV should help someone, a hiring manager should be able to make a decision within 4 seconds of looking at your CV. So first thing first, get rid of the myths that you've been told, because there are so many out there for CVs, even when I first started looking for a job, that, for example, it must only be 2 pages long. Hogwash. What's important is that you're able to capture the imagination of the hiring manager or the talent acquisition partner within 4 seconds of them looking at page 1. If your CV is 10 pages or 2 pages, it doesn't matter. If you haven't captured their attention on page 1, they're not going to go to page 2, 3, 4 anyway. They've already put you on the disregard pile. It sounds horrible, but that's the nature of the situation. We've got so many people applying for jobs, some relevant, most not relevant. They're just pressing the easy apply button. It's so easy to do, and they're applying for everything. And it means that, you've got to capture imagination early. There's a couple of tips I would give to do this. Remember that the hiring manager is looking for where you can add value. So often they'll create a job description, and it might be, from an HR perspective, they need someone with a CIPD qualification. If that's the case, or maybe they need a degree or whatever it is you're applying for, whatever you do, put that information on page 2. It needs to be on page 1. It needs to be front and center, because that's probably the first thing they're going to be looking for. CIPD qualified, great, tick. I can see that within less than half a second, right? I've spotted that in my buzzwords. I've seen CIPD. This is just an example. The next thing they want to do is, okay, what we don't want to see now is reams and reams about what your dissertation was about and all the other bits to just fill up space. Let's keep it concise. Let's keep it relevant to what you're looking to do, and where can you add value? What are your achievements? What have you done? Where have you delivered value in your previous positions? So try and have a think about what that is. You may not be aware, but whatever your achievements are, let's see them front and center and try and relate them to the job you're applying for. All right. So if you're applying for an HR management role that is going through a system transformation project and you've been involved in a system implementation project, I want to see that straight away. Now I've got 2 ticks. I've got CIPD, I've got implementation. And I haven't even looked at what your last job was yet. I'm just seeing and putting this off your CV very early. So I'd have name, contact details. You'd be surprised how many people send me CVs without contact details on. It's incredible. All that time and you can't contact them when they're perfect. So contact details. Then have your qualifications next. This is the structure I would use, okay? After that, I would have your skills summary. And these skills are related to the job. So if they're HR skills, document your HR skills. Keep them bullet pointed, keep them brief, and keep them succinct. So I can pick out on the buzzwords and the things that are critical for where I want to find value in that CV. Below that, have achievements. We're not looking at hundreds. We're not looking at long paragraphs. We're looking at one-liners. I've implemented a system from cradle to grave within timeline, within budget. Perfect. Okay, so that kind of achievement summary. You're probably looking at 3 or 4. Then you're looking at your career. Okay. Now, some people will spend too much time putting all of their jobs and trying to cram them into the first page. If I'm honest, as a recruiter, I'm not really interested in what you were doing in 2008, 2002. 1999, whatever the period is. I'm interested in what you were doing in your last role. And if you've had a few roles in the last couple of years, then those positions only. Beyond that, you've already progressed your experience. You've already progressed your expertise. You've developed. So that other experience that got you there isn't as relevant anymore. So you want that on page 1, and you don't want the position to run over a page. So you want to keep it succinct. So you want to try and keep that role on page 1. So when I look at your CV, I can see the sector and the employer that you've worked for. I can see your critical tasks within that position. I can see the achievements and the value that you've added. I can see your qualifications. I can see your particular skills, and probably a summary as well. If you can fit a summary in there, probably after your qualification or your achievements, then great. And that's just a little bit about you. A lot of people write the same stuff. So they'll write things like, I have a great attention to detail. I'm a great team player. And that stuff's great. I don't want to take stuff away. But what's going to make you unique? What's going to make it stand out? So, for example, have a look at the company you're applying for. Take a look at their mission statement. Take a look at the values and the things that are important to that company, and then mirror it. If you're applying, for example, to Dr. Martens, I love this because Dr. Martens have in their mission statement, they look for people with a rebellious attitude. They're very big on people that supported not-for-profit activities. Now, if you volunteer, for example, or if you've been involved in raising money for charity, or if you have anything you've been rebellious in your lifetime, what a great time to put it in your summary. You know, similar to the mission statement of Dr. Martens, I consider myself to be a rebellious, committed, philanthropist, and or whatever it is you want to write, but make it relevant. That's going to jump off the page to a hiring manager. Bullet points are key as well. Make sure that, again, simple things, that the fonts are the same, spacing is consistent, that you've spell checked it. You'd be surprised some people don't spell check CVs as well. But really, the key thing I would give is it's about page 1. Page 1, you've got to look at that, put yourself in the position of the hiring manager for the job you're applying for, and ask yourself, would I make a decision on this applicant within 3 to 4 seconds? If the answer you're giving yourself is no, then your CV still needs work. If you would put yourself on the shortlist pile within 3 to 4 seconds, then it's probably good enough to progress as an application. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
And Niam's put a question in about, what if you don't have that work experience? And I think you've just been given part of the answer, Niam, which is that anything that you've done, which has involved either voluntary work that you've been involved in, either it could be mentoring younger people, it could be clubs and committees that you've been involved in, it could be sporting activities or a deep interest that you have. It's to find a way of putting those things in, not just listing them as saying, I play this and I play that, but the role you play within it, what it's given you, what it's helped you. Because you will find that there are lots of others that are applying, and some of them will just literally describe for example, their degree course in intimate detail. I'm not that fussed about the degree course. I'm fussed about the fact the person's done a degree, and then I'm interested in what do they do in the rest of their life? What makes them stand out? Why would I want to interview them? Why would I want to have them in my team? What are the things that are going to stand out? The other things I'd just say about a CV from my perspective, and it's funny because I was helping someone with one this morning. They'd done a phenomenal job of sending me a beautiful CV that had been created on a Mac. I put it up onto a PC and all the formatting was all over the place. They made the classic error of sending it to me as a .pages file. What they should do is always convert it to a PDF. Now, some agencies, and I don't know, what Nick's position on this is, hate it if you send them a PDF because they have to convert it back.
Word is I always recommend Word, but either or, yeah. Yeah.
So I recommend PDFs if you're sending stuff yourself directly to employers, for example, and if you're sending to agencies or search companies, send a Word file because they can then play with it as they need and present you in the best way. But not only was all of the filing corrupted, but bits had gone missing, and the colouring of the fonts looked beautiful when she showed it to me on her screen, because she'd managed to use a sort of almost gold font. But what I pointed out was when you print it out, it's very light grey and unreadable. So my other tip would be, when you think you've got a great CV, print it out, first of all. Just, does it actually look like you're expecting to? Convert it to PDF for most of the people you're going to send it to. And then always, 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 as in always, make sure that at least one other person who's got a half decent handling of English has a quick scan through it and spots the silly typos that you can no longer see. Now, you know, I've now written books, and I think I've got it absolutely perfect. I've rechecked the book 12 times. I send it off, and an editor says to me straight away, "You've got 20 simple errors in there." I can't see them anymore. I'm blind to them. You will have those errors now in your CV. Get a friend to help you, you know, wipe them out, because there are still some employers who will look at a CV and go, "There's errors in this. I don't think we could cope with them in that position." It's a sad, simple fact.
I'd like to build on that a little bit, and I'm going to comment on Alex's comment as well here, because it's quite interesting that you referenced your age in the post, which would suggest to me that you've got something there that makes you feel like that's working against you. So obviously we have age discrimination protecting individuals anyway, but you only need to include the last 12 years of your career history. If you want to include more, you can. You're not at liberty to. Last 12 years is really the most relevant where you ever need to go. So whether you choose to do more or not is up to you. But also, if you want to highlight the experience you've got, so just reading a couple of comments you put there, that you were senior HR advisor, business partner in public and private sector, most recently telecoms. Great. If you're applying for a job in telecom, you don't need to have the piece in there necessarily about your experience in public sector. But you absolutely, on page 1, and I'd probably bold it, experience of working in the telecom sector, you know, X amount of years, whatever it is, as a people business partner. If the job spec is asking for experience in like Workday or, you know, a similar kind of HR platform, and you have that experience, don't trust the person reviewing it to try and find it. Make it so it's part of their, it becomes part of their vision. So bold it, put Workday. I've used systems, including Workday, straight off the bat. Again, I'm spotting that in the first 4 seconds. There's loads of things you can do like that that really pulls the eye in. The other thing I'd mention is summaries. If you are going to choose to use one, are really important. I get lots of summaries where people forget what they've written, and they'll say something like, I'm applying this HR, you know, apply for an HR manager job, but in the summary it says, I have long-term aspirations to do something completely different. Or I've got long-term aspirations to be a role that just isn't on offer. And people will come away from that application if they feel like you're not committed to them over the long term. So just be aware that if you're writing sort of that in your summaries, that you obviously edit them before we come back, which is obviously quite important. There's one other element as well. Now, this is something that has changed over the last couple of years. I don't think many people are aware of it, but I would recommend you have 2 versions of your CV. Now, the reason for this is if you're applying for jobs online, often the person reviewing your application will be a talent partner or a recruiting or resourcing advisor who works for the organization. Now, they do a difficult job. This is not about criticizing what they do, but what they do is they will essentially be the first kind of a level of shortlisting will be done by them. And they'll be looking at roles that range from underwater basket weavers all the way through to property acquisition directors. There's no way they can be a specialist in all of those fields and understand all the nuances involved in all of the different positions they have to manage. So if you're applying to one of those individuals, SEO or search engine optimization of your CV is critical. This is about bringing out buzzwords on your CV that relate to the job spec. So for example, I do payroll recruitment and HR recruitment. I had a payroll manager who was recently rejected for a job that I sent to a talent partner because that individual did not have P45s written on their CV. Now, if you do payroll, P45 is the most basic form you'll ever come across. They didn't put it on there because they felt it was a waste of space, and it actually dumbed them down in terms of level. They're much more strategic than handling P45 forms. But the talent partner knew nothing about payroll. So as far as they were concerned, they didn't have the right experience to get the job and were rejected. Now, it turned out that individual did get the job, but it took me going back to the talent partner and explaining the reasons why I didn't have it on their CV and the reason they need to put it forward. So sometimes buzzwords are, or I would say buzzwords are much more important if you're applying to a talent partner or resourcing partner. You need to be a little bit more layman in the way that you present your application. On the flip side, if you're applying direct to a hiring manager, so you're an HR professional applying to someone like Ted, Ted doesn't want to see P45s in the CV. He wants to see strategic value. He wants to see the high-level management stuff you've been doing if you're a manager or whatever it is that you're doing. So I would just have two slightly nuanced CVs, one for talent applications and one for direct hiring applications if you're going direct to a hiring manager. If that's helpful. As an experienced HR director yourself, Ted, and bearing in mind some of the challenges that I've just discussed, what would you advise that HR professionals did for their CV or the application process to help them get noticed amongst all the noise, amongst all the applications as an HR director?
Yeah, so I think the last role I was recruiting for was a senior HRBP, and there was something like about 110 applications that came through, of which many were you could just wipe out straight away because they were people from Eastern Bloc countries that were just chancing their arm, and I don't know what they'd picked up on, but let's say half of those were potentially serious candidates that we were sifting and looking at. I think the first thing is, it sounds really boring, but I just want to know, can they do this job? So I'm trying to find, and a bit like you advised earlier, Nick, I'm trying to find on that front page of the CV, is there something here that makes me want to even bother looking at the second page? Is there something that tells me that they are experienced in this kind of work or ready to be? So it doesn't have to be that they're already a senior HRBP, because we all know that titles in human resources are a complete mess. But it has to show that they've had experience of working alongside and partnering with the business in some format, probably. Or if they've been working in a shared service centre, for example, that they've had opportunities and projects that have been working with client-side groups so that they've got that initial experience. And I want to see that they've got those basic things in place. In most cases, I am looking to make sure they've got a qualification. So I agree with your earlier summary about what are the key things. Then after that, I'm looking to see, is somebody just a bit different? I don't want to hire people who are black and white, who do everything by rote. I'm looking for somebody who's got a little bit of challenge, got a bit of interest, and sometimes I spot that not in their summaries of the work they've done or in the education they've had. I spot it in their interests. So I'm one of those that always encourages people to actually have a bit somewhere, probably towards the bottom of the CV, that just says what your interests are. I mean, there have been times, for example, in one organisation I was at, where the cricket team had just literally lost its wicketkeeper, and somebody, when it was trying to make the final decision about which 6 were going to be shortlisted, one of them made the balance because they happened to be a cricketer. And that was a woman who eventually got appointed, and she became the new wicketkeeper. Now, that's a tiny little thing that got her just over the edge into the interviewing process. And then in the interviewing process, she turned out to be magical, even though the CV was light, in terms of data. So it's the other thing I think I'd add to this is sometimes when and some of you would have done this because you've been in hiring situations yourselves, you'll go through and you'll think, this covering note, this CV has just been sent to 100 people, and I don't feel like they've made any thought or put any effort into the fact they're applying to me as the vice president at Glaxo. What I do like to see is someone who's put a little bit of effort into that and make it relevant to the place that they're heading towards. So that's an important little extra that I think is needed. And the advice that comes off the back of that is, if you're putting your project plan together at the moment about how to get your next new job, it's to say to yourself, do several applications well, don't just do large numbers poorly, because people can see it. Think about yourself hiring. You'll remember that. What it looks
just
like.
A couple of points we've had on the chat. So I can see that Neves mentioned that the university gave you quite advice quite contradicting. What I would say is, it's difficult to give generalistic advice from a university perspective. They don't know what you're going to go to apply for, what you're going to do. You've got to take each job on its own course. So as you see an opportunity, what is it they're looking for and where can you add value? If your modules add value, if the units you've studied are specific to what you're looking to do, then absolutely include them. But I wouldn't just include them as units. I would actually write that into a separate value statement, within your achievements or skills, and say, look, I'm interested in this job because I studied a unit on X, and this will allow me to deliver for you Y, as opposed to just listing the units. But it's difficult for universities because they are generalistic in approach, and we want to be specific. We want to avoid that generalist application process, and we want to be specific, as Tej just mentioned. And for you, Alex, I probably get 95% of every application I get for any position is irrelevant and not suitable for the role I'm recruiting for. So most will chance their arm, and things like LinkedIn easy apply function makes it so easy. All they do is press easy apply. They often even read the job spec. You'll see a lot of job descriptions now that actually say, when you apply, please quote X. And that's just a little, Press Monge do this. It's a little barrier check to make sure that people have actually read the job they're applying for. So they're able to screen, and have a look out for this on the press applications if they're still doing it. They will actually not even entertain, no matter how skilled your CV is, they won't even look at the application that you've quoted what they've asked you to quote in their job advert. It's their way of checking you've read what you're applying for. So it's not just a job. Companies are not looking to hire people who just want a job. They want to hire people who want their job. There's a difference. So if you can make your application speak to them because that's the actual job you want, not just any job, it'll make a huge difference. Kalyani, highlighting what is unique that you can offer. Well, we can, by all means, connect with me separately on this if it's something that you want that you're struggling with. There's always something that we can pull out that will make you speak and highlight what you can.
Can I talk to that, Nick? One of the things that I always bore people with is mentoring. Okay, so in my world, I mentor a lot of people, but I'm also mentored by several people, even though I've got grey hair and look very old. And what I'd say is that you don't have to think about mentoring as being going and finding a special scheme and signing lots of forms and then having a special structured thing. It can sometimes be, is there somebody that you value? It might be a tutor in the past. It might be a previous line manager at another job. It might be a really good friend who works in the profession. Go back to them. Don't tell them you want them to be your mentor. Just say to them, I'm just at the moment struggling with this issue or this thing. And I'm trying to, for example, think about what I can put them that make me look a bit special and different in my interview. If that person knows you, they can talk to you, just have a coffee with them or a Zoom these days. And you'll start to hear what their perspective of you is. And it'll give you that confidence to go, yeah, actually, that's something I'm damn good at. I'm going to find a way of weaving that into my application. So by working with a mentor, you can get to know yourself better. The other way that you can really add value is to remember that there's always somebody less experienced than you who's out there looking for help and support. And some of the things that I've learned most have been from the people I mentor. So they come to me thinking I'm helping them, but actually what happens is I learn an awful lot from them. So I learn about new ways of operating and working within social media. I learn about how politically incorrect I am, and I need to change the way I operate and work from those people who are often 20 or 30 years my junior. All of you can be mentors to somebody. So it might be that you go, I can see that person, they're a new trainee or they're just doing a placement. I'm going to offer to just have a regular chat with them. You don't have to say you're going to be a mentor. You just say, I'm going to have a regular chat with you, make sure everything's going okay, ask me anything you like at any time. And it builds into a mentoring relationship without any formality. Those are the ways that you can start to sort of really feel good about life and pull it through. And Niam, a last thing on yours, if you're going in, I was saying don't put in loads of detail about each module at university, but did you do an essay or did you do a little project? Because I remember one candidate when we were looking for a trainee in human resources that stood out because she had done a really interesting project at college as her main essay on inclusion. And I just wanted to meet her and interview her and find out what she'd found out. And it was a really helpful sort of way of making the connection. Okay.
And a lot of things about standing out as well. So if there are hundreds of applications and you've missed the deadline for whatever reason, don't feel like that's a missed opportunity. Or even if you have applied and you made the deadline, there's nothing stopping you from showing your interest by making a direct approach. Now, on LinkedIn, it will usually tell you who's responsible for hiring the role. either because it'll tell you, now I'll often give you two things. It'll tell you who's handling the applications, which is slightly different. That might be the talent partner, but it'll also usually tell you in most job descriptions who the role reports to. Once you know that, there's nothing stopping you on LinkedIn to search who that individual is and just let them know. So drop them a message, drop them an email. Most emails are easy to find. You can Google the email format, name.surname@bp.com, whatever it might be. But drop them through an email and just say, look, I'm not stepping out of process here. I have sent my application in through the correct channels and I'm waiting for feedback. But I wanted to touch base with you directly because this is not just any role for me. This is a role that I would love to secure for the following reasons. And I wanted to make sure with so many applications flooding, or so much interest in your position that my application wasn't overlooked, because to get this opportunity would mean the world or whatever it might be. So don't be afraid to do that. I guarantee that you'll get so many responses that way. They might not guarantee you the job, but you'll get noticed. And if you're polite and you're not stepping out of process, you're not stepping on anyone's toes by doing it, that will help. The second thing I'd mention is recruiters should be your friend. I know I'm obviously biased in this approach. But what people forget is, for candidates, the service we provide is in theory completely free. We don't charge for the coaching we give. We don't charge for changing CVs or any of that stuff, because who we charge is the end client. That's our commercial terms. We're always with the end client. So everything we do for candidates is completely free of charge. However, it's absolutely within our interest to make sure your CV is brilliant, because if it's not, you're not going to get interviews, which means I've got very little chance of getting a commercial return on representing your application. So I would recommend speaking to specialists, and whatever you do, if it's HR, if it's accountancy, if it's underwater basket weaving, find someone who specializes in that sector and ask them, what are hiring managers looking for? Can you help me with my CV when you apply for a job? Can you work with me? Because it should be in the recruiter's interest to do so. Because if they get your CV looking sharp, they've got a much higher opportunity, someone like myself, of placing you in a position and making a commercial return on that support work. Even if they don't place you, though, you still get that support, knowing that they're giving you all the right advice for the right reasons. Not because we're trying to charge you money for a CV service, because that's not how it works. It's the client that pays the fee. So actually, you've got a huge resource there in utilizing expertise like mine or any of my team or the other agencies that are out there as well. There's a lot of expertise in the recruitment field that you can probably call on to help you with that process. Now, I'm aware that we've talked a lot about CV so far. But also there's other challenges we talked about in the introduction there, which people are faced with at the minute. I'd like to know from yourself, Ted, some of the things you're coming across for those perhaps who are still employed, but are anxious about losing their job, or they're anxious about how to give the best version of themselves when they're isolated, or they are, have some job uncertainty. What kind of advice would you give to those individuals?
Yeah, I think it's actually relatively difficult to give generic advice, Nick. That's the thing, because everybody has literally a unique situation that they find themselves in. And of the people that I've been mentoring at the moment, there are lots of different variants in terms of the level of anxiety or stress that they're under. But a lot of the time, my response is relatively simple, and I think keeping things simple is the most important thing. It's to, if they still have work at the moment, it's to focus on the fact that they do have work. They have a great platform then to continue working from. The majority of their work these days is in supporting colleagues and trying to maintain a decent, human, dignified environment at work, when sometimes managers because they are struggling themselves, and it is about holding their head high above. And then the most important thing for those people is to find others that they can decompress with. So one of the things that I've been doing, there's quite a few people that I work with who are like head of HR for a small biotech or a small company, but they're a solo role. They might have an administrator maybe doing their CPP or something like that, but at the end of the day, they're a single role. What I've been doing is getting them to link up with others in a similar boat. So if they're on, the Abingdon estate and there's 50 companies, to look around those, find who the HR people are, email them, phone them, get in touch, and start to form a little self-help group. Because right now, HR needs to help itself, and they need to do things like booking out an hour where they all have a Zoom, and it's in their diaries and no one else can interrupt on that time, and they just sit and have tea and coffee and chat to each other about how bloody awful it is, if you'll excuse my French, because that's essential in terms of people understanding that they are actually not alone. If you're in a bigger organization, it's easier to do to an extent. But sometimes there are people in bigger organizations who don't want to let people think they're frail or suffering. And so they sort of stride on, trying to show how positive they are. So sometimes it can work for them as well to go to another organization and find an HR person there and just go, what's it like for you? And it is, I think humans benefit a lot from just talking stuff out. Sometimes you can do that with your partner at home, but for many people, the partner at home, the last thing they want to do is hear about your woes at work. So it is about finding others. And there are some great little websites and places where people can go and just be able to go, or, where's the wine?
I would echo some of that for sure. I think you've given some great advice there, and I'm going to give some people a few tips and things you can do. I mean, first thing is we always think about well-being as being about nutrition, about exercise and all these kind of things, but actually social interaction is absolutely critical to our own well-being. So we need those social interactions. We're social people inherently, so that is really important. But we've got some amazing tools out there, and yet most people don't access them or even know they exist. We look at them, we kind of know they're there, but we don't know how to utilize it. And one of those is LinkedIn groups. So LinkedIn, no matter who you are or what you do, so whether it's yourself, Neve, or whether it's yourself, Alex, there are groups for pretty much everything. So if you are an HR job seeker, for example, or you're a new graduate looking for a job, or you're an experienced job searcher, or even if you are employed and you just want to find a new HR network, use LinkedIn groups. You can join, I think, up to 50, maybe even enhance that now. These are full of already made communities of people looking to find other people like you to converse with. These are people who have already joined the groups because they want to talk about the issues that matter to them. They want to talk about human resources, if that's what you're interested in, or they want to talk about the job search process. They share tips, and you can build amazing communities. And it's amazing as well where those networks can lead you. I've met Ted through LinkedIn and through a private WhatsApp group that I set up, where I decided to bring some like-minded TEDx and authors together into a little group where we could just chat. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. Join an HR group on LinkedIn, for example, and say, look, this is some of the challenges I'm facing. I'm trying to find a small community of 8 to 10 people, just as an example, who would like to join a private WhatsApp group to talk about the challenges we are faced with at the moment in HR, just as an example. I guarantee if that group is 1,000 members strong, there'll be at least 8 people willing to join. And they've probably all been waiting for you to ask the question. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there. You don't know if one of those other 8, 10, 20, 50, 100 people that join that group may know someone who knows someone who knows someone that can just lead to other opportunities you'd never even considered. New clients, new job roles, whatever it might be. It's amazing. Networking can be so powerful if it's used in the right way. And you're never too late to start on LinkedIn. Don't worry about how many connections you have or don't have. It's not what it's about. Go and join the communities. As soon as you've joined a group, you often have to ask and get accepted. You can then email any person in that group completely for free through their email feature. So it's also a great way to build your connections and to build your database. And that kind of echoes some of the group things that Ted was talking about just a moment ago. Also, what I wanted to ask...
Nick, I've got one other thing to add, though.
Yeah, sure.
It's to say, if you are in a position where you know that you want to move on from your current role, and you're suffering from all of this overload, or you are currently in a position where you're seeking a job, one of the things you should also be thinking about is, how do you continue to look after your own personal development? And in the same way that finding groups of like-minded people, either online or through physical contact, is good. So is doing some of the training that's available. There's some fantastic new stuff that's become available online. The Open University has actually made a lot of their stuff free at the moment. If you join some of those programs, not only do you start to grow and develop your own skill set and your own understanding, but you get a chance to meet other people who are on the program with you. And so, say, quite a few of those are now free, whereas they used to be charging for them. And the huge benefit of that is, if someone turns around at some point and says to you, so you were made redundant in April, what have you done since then? It's completely different if you say to the interviewer, well, I've just been applying for jobs, as opposed to, well, I've got a couple of extra additional qualifications now. I did a mental health first aid certificate. I've picked up a new understanding of website design, whatever it is. It shows that you wanted to remain active, go for it, making stuff happen in your life. It doesn't matter what it is. In my case, for example, when I was made redundant, one of the things I did was, first off, was just to say, I've never had an opportunity to go around the world. I'm going to take my redundancy money and go around the world with it. You can't do that at the moment because of COVID. In those days, I could. And when I came back, I realized what I really wanted to do, because I'd had a chance to see a completely different world from the one that I'd seen in 2-week chunks where I still had email with me. You know, I was able to go and have a proper period of time off with no one chasing me or phoning me up and saying there's been a disaster. How do we solve it or resolve it, Ted? Sorry, Nick, to interrupt, but I just wanted to
actually, you picked up on a point I wanted to raise, which was, you know, one of the biggest anxieties, whether you've been made redundant or whether you are faced with potential redundancy and you're anxious about your job. We did some stats at the start of this about just how high the percentage is of people anxious about whether or not that, you know, their job security is going to last, you know, over the coming months. Yeah. Redundancy is not a dirty word. I work in recruitment. I deal with so many people who've been made redundant for a multitude of different reasons. Do not be afraid of fronting up the fact you were made redundant. There are so many reasons it could happen, particularly at the moment. We're in unprecedented times. And I wanted to bring this up because, Ted, you know, you've been made redundant on a couple of occasions in your career, and every time it's opened up doors to some wonderful opportunities for you. And I think a lot of finding a new position is about mindsets, having a positive approach where one door closes, another one opens. But if you dwell, it will come across in your application, it'll come across in your writing, it'll come across in your interview. But if you have the right positive attitude, I guarantee and I promise you, as a recruiter, it'll come across and we'll notice it and we'll feel it. But I'd love if you can give some examples from your experiences, because you've been through this process and you've come out the other side positive on every occasion.
Yeah, and I think when I'm an HR director recruiting, I'm not particularly interested in hiring damaged goods. In other words, someone who comes in and the first thing they do is complain about their old job and why they were made redundant and how unfair it was. What I want is to hire people who are going to lift the spirits, be motivated, etc. So one of the things that I say to people is, you know, immediately after you've been made redundant, the first thing is you need to get yourself through the transition curve. So you need to go through all the anger and the frustration and the annoyance. And the only way you can really do that is by talking it through with other people, with members of the family, with partners, with other friends who've been in a similar situation. In fact, the biggest single barrier to a few people is even admitting that they're redundant. And like you said, it's no longer a dirty word. So my biggest single encouragement to anybody these days is to tell friends, including Facebook and everybody, hey guys, my company's had to let me go. And at the moment, you know, COVID is a great reason for lots of that happening and transition happening. I'm just starting to sort of think about what I do next. Love to chat to some of you about sort of different ideas I've got, etc., and keep that upbeat thinking going, and start looking and exploring. Don't do what is a mistake that some people do, which is to prepare the CV the following day after being made redundant, send it off, and try and get the same job back somewhere else immediately. Normally, you've got at least a month's pay in your back pocket to just buy you a little bit of time to sit back and think, get through your transition curve, come out the other side, and then start to do some interesting things. And for me, I you know, one of the things that I got was the first time around was anxiety. And it was difficult to cope with that to start off with. And then one or two people just gave me some little simple tricks and tips. You know, it's things like when you realize that you're feeling very anxious, get more exercise than you used to. So for some people that might be running, jogging, or joining a gym. For me, it isn't. It's about getting out on a push bike and just cycling gently and taking some photos and stuff. But doing more exercise than I was used to get my body sort of working well. And then some little things like I was struggling with sleep, but sometimes it's because I kept thinking, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And then I'd wake up and just having a notepad and pencil next to my bed and at 2 a.m, writing down the words when I thought about them, somehow released me and allowed me to then get back to sleep again. So there's lots of little things like that you can help. But the biggest single one, and I keep referring to it, is finding people to talk to it about, because there's nothing better than other humans helping intervene. And you know, it could be anybody in your whole sphere, and often the best people are the ones who are in the same boat as you. So you discover someone else has just been made unemployed, you join them in a little club, you share examples of things that you find when you're doing job searches. You go, oh, I just found this. Are you interested in that one? And you chat to each other on a daily basis and you get through it together. That's the best single way.
Brilliant advice. And actually, it's not a bad idea to do your first version of CV whilst walking. And I say that's silly. Go out for a fresh air walk and just think about what you want to include before you sit in front of your computer and start writing. You take a notepad out with you if you want, but go outdoors. It's amazing how inspirational it can be. And just think about, what do I want to talk about? What are my achievements? Where can I add value? What have I really done in my career to date that I really want to talk about and bring to the surface? And you'll find your thought patterns are different if you're out in the open doing that than they are if you go straight in front of a computer. So some great advice there from Ted. I'm conscious of time. I don't want to leave the webinar without talking to people about interviews, because we talked about CVs and there were a number of interview tips as well to help you get ahead. CVs have one purpose in my mind, and one purpose only, and that is to get you an interview. Now, before we jump into the interview piece quickly, there are, of course, some other creative ways as well you can think about, and there's interviews also involve some creativity, which is, don't be afraid as well to experiment a little bit in your application process. If you're confident on video, there's nothing wrong with you recording a video and sending that to the hiring manager and saying, look, I've sent my CV through the correct channels, but this is me and this is why I'm applying. Make them short, make them sweet, but don't let that replace the CV process. But let's say you've got the interview now, they love your CV, you've listened to this webinar, you take some tips, you've been out in the fresh air, you've created a masterpiece, and now you've been selected for interview. I've got a number of tips I'd like to give, but I'm going to open up to Ted to give his tips first, and hopefully between the two of us, you'll have a lot of takeaways to move forward with. Ted.
Yeah, so I think you do need to prepare. Some people go to me, oh no, I'm just going to wing it. I'm at my best if I just wing it when I go into an interview. But you do need to be thinking back through your most recent life, and a bit like when you're putting the bullet points into a CV, you've got to be thoughtful about the fact that probably people are going to be putting you into situations and scenarios and finding how you respond and answer a question. And they're looking, in my case, if I'm an HR director interviewing you, I'm looking to see whether you work in a very black and white systematic way, or whether you can cope with grey and look at different angles and issues related to the scenario. But more importantly even than that, I think, is it's that you remember that you have to be honest to yourself. You're not trying to sell a perfect Ted in my case. You're trying to sell real Ted. If they don't like real Ted, then probably you wouldn't want to end up working there anyway. If they do like real Ted, then they've got a real treat coming, because they've now discovered in an interview what real Ted is like. And that's got to be a good thing all the way around. So I always say, my overriding thing is, don't try and invent things that you're not. Don't try and second guess the answer they want to hear. Give your honest answer. Be your authentic self, and don't worry about anything other than the fact that you've been honest in this process, such that they know exactly who they're recruiting. And that sometimes means, and I've pointed to people who've said to me, that's not my strongest point. I can do that if you need me to, Ted, but actually I'm better at doing this. And I go, this is fabulous. This person actually knows themselves, is being honest about it. And I'm actually thinking they probably are better at that than they realize. And I'm going to take on this challenge of taking them on and then seeing if I can grow their confidence and develop them, because I think they could actually be an HR director in the long term. So they get me thinking like that. Someone who tries to tell me they're perfect, I start to get very wary and I back off.
A couple of tips that I would recommend you can take away. One is, try and set yourself out from what everyone else is doing. So I'm going to assume that everyone watching this who has an interview is going to look at the About Us section for the company they're applying for. So in you reading the About Us section, it is not putting you above 95% of people are interviewing, even though in your mind you might think you're really well prepared because you've memorized all about the company and they were established in 1888 and whatever. That's great. That's the minimum I would expect. What can you do that sets yourself apart from everyone else that's interviewing? They may have shortlisted 5, 10 candidates maybe. How can you rise above them and show that you are committed? And these are things I would think about. Don't just look at About Us, look at their mission statement and values, and think about answers that relate and speak to them on a mission statement and value-led level. Okay, so we used the Dr. Martens example earlier. I'd be thinking about examples in my mind that relate directly to what they look for in their values and mission statement. That's number one. Number two, we have access to a multitude of news and outlets and social platforms and all sorts. Now, I know, Ted, in front of me as an HR director, if I'm going to come and meet Ted for an interview, I guarantee he has more than just a section on a website. He's published books. He's got reviews on Amazon. He's probably released news articles. He's been in publications. There's probably some information on LinkedIn about the groups he's a part of. All of that gives me a really good understanding of who Ted is. And I might, so there's nothing more powerful than helping egos. And if I join an interview with Ted and say, Ted, great to meet you. By the way, saw this article you wrote in HR Director magazine about X, Y, and Z. It really spoke to me. I was really impressed with your view on it. Well, I mean, who doesn't like to hear that? If someone told me they enjoy my podcast, or listens to it,
read the book.
It makes the interviewer feel good, and it starts the rapport from the right place. And I guarantee no one else is Googling the interviewers in the same way. No one else is picking out the nuances about that interviewer. You can give yourself an opportunity to actually have a conversation that's two-way, not just them asking you questions, but you actually know a little bit about them as well. And you might find you've got areas where you really connect. If you're both part of a cricket group, for example, and you're a passionate cricketer, and you know the interviewer is as well, why wouldn't you bring that up, just as an example? It's an opportunity for you to talk and find some common ground. So definitely do your research, but do your research above and beyond what everyone else is doing. The second thing I would mention is, you're going to say something there, Ted? I'm going to go into
just on research, Nick. Go and look at Glassdoor and look at the most recent press releases for the company. You will be expected as an HR person to be aware that 2 days ago they put out a release about blah, blah, blah. Sure. And you'll be expected to know that there are 7 or 8 people on Glassdoor who've had a terrible period during probation and been fired before the probation period's ended. If you don't read that and don't know that, then I'm a little bit shocked if you haven't done that basic level of homework. Okay, that's just the research.
It's about differentiating yourself from, is this just any job and you hope you get something, or is this the job that I want? And that's what interviewers want to know, that you are committed over a longer term. The second thing I'd mention is, me and Ted talked about this off air, is we have 3 layers of questioning. And a good interviewer will ask you a question like, you're probably familiar with this. What's your biggest weakness, or what's your greatest strength? That's great. We're all prepared for those kind of questions. What happens if the interviewer then says, that's great, what's your next biggest achievement? Or what's your next biggest weakness? And then you answer that, and then they ask you again, why is that your weakness? Why is that your strength? Expect whatever it is that they ask you to go into 3 levels of detail. They ask you what your greatest achievement is, and you give your greatest achievement is jumping out of an aeroplane. The next question they should be asking you is, what compelled you to go and jump out of an aeroplane? And you might not be expecting that answer. And why was that an achievement for you? For other people, my uncle jumps out of airplanes for a living. It's not a big thing for him. Why was it important for you? Try and think about where the conversation can go and have layers that you can provide back. Always provide examples, absolutely critically provide examples. Don't just give answers. Don't just say what you think they want to hear. Be honest, as Ted has said, make it relevant to what they want to achieve through the job role, make it relevant to the values and behaviors, and be prepared to go to 3 different layers of detail. If you can do that, it's very, very difficult for anyone really to compete with you in an interview process. It will really help you and elevate you above everyone else who's come in with prepared answers that sound robotic almost, haven't done their research on a business, haven't done their research on the interviewer, and therefore been unable to create good rapport. Funnily enough, it's often those individuals that I speak to who think they've nailed the interview, and it's really hard for me to give feedback to say, sorry, you didn't get it for whatever reason, this other individual did, because they've just done a bit more research, they've just built a slightly better rapport. People do not just hire based on skills. It's only half the argument here. We've got to be able to show that we have the same cultural beliefs and values and all the different things that we are mirrored with that business. You're able to show that you can evolve the culture of that company by your outlook. That will really impress interviewers as well. So have a think about some of those things. Have a think about what you can achieve. And remember, it's a 2-way process. You're interviewing the client as much as they're interviewing you. You want to make sure it's somewhere you want to work. So be aware of that as well. And on that basis, make sure you've got questions prepared at the end. There's nothing worse than an interviewee at the end saying, I had some questions, but you've answered them all already. This is going to be potentially your career for the next 2, 3, 4, 10 years, and you've really got nothing else to ask. Always have something you can ask. Always. A great question is, to an interviewer, ask them, what is it that you love about working for the company so much? Get them to sell it back to you. What do you love so much about your business? Why does the business speak to you? What's been your greatest achievement since you joined the firm? Let them sell it back to you. And you realize that actually they're suddenly selling you the role, and suddenly the rapport builds really well. So have a think about those kind of questions at the end of the interview. And last but not least, always thank the interviewer for their time and remind them that you are keen on the job. Thank you, Ted. I've really enjoyed today's interview. I just want to tell you before I go, I would really love this job. This isn't just a job for me. This is the job. I would love to work for your brand. It speaks to me. I think I can add great value to your company. If there is anything that I haven't answered fully that you would like me to cover again now, please let me know now before I go. Otherwise, I'd just like to leave you to say, I hope I get the job. Something like that. And it'll really leave on a...
The other thing, when you're going for a more senior role in particular, as a candidate, I think it's a courteous thing to do. And it surprises me that there's only about 1% actually do this, which is that either later that day or the following day, you write to the head interviewer. In my case, it would be the CEO that I've just been interviewed by, and just say, thank you for the interview and the opportunity to come and see you. I was really impressed with what I heard and saw. It would make a fantastic opportunity for me, and I'd love to work with you. That, or I don't think this is me, I'm withdrawing, whichever way around it is. But when I was working in America, almost every candidate knew that they had to write to me as the interviewer and just say their thanks. In Britain, it doesn't happen. And so when you do it, it stands you out again. So if ever you're on a cliff edge of which of these, from this first 5, which 2 are we bringing back? You might be the second one that's brought back just by that little action of doing that. Nick, the other thing you gave me, which I'm going to ask you to do back to me, is...
I'm going to jump in just quickly on your last point. There's 2 elements you want to be careful of here. One is if you're working through an agency, absolutely write the letter, but send it to the recruitment agent, not direct, because there's a reason they've got a commercial arrangement. They don't want you to think you've gone out of process. So if you're going through an agency, absolutely write a thank you note, but send it to your recruiter, not to the hiring manager. But remind yourself, it's not just about being courteous. It tells the employer that you're engaged and interested in the job. Whereas if it's between 2 and they don't know if they're both really committed, which one's more committed, which one's going to last, which one can I retain, it's going to be the one that's demonstrating their commitment with a follow-up. I will always forward those emails on to the hiring managers, but just make sure that you follow the correct process. If you're going through an agency, if you're going direct, obviously it doesn't matter. Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's great. Absolutely great point. The other thing that we talked about the other day when we were chatting about what we might discuss was the issue about, can I ask for feedback? And you gave me a great comment, which I was learning from you on, which is don't go generic, wasn't it? So I'll hand it over to you.
I will. So obviously it's difficult for me. We're dealing with feedback all the time, and there's no legal requirement to give feedback. So sometimes we're kind of in a rock and a hard place as well. We're trying to get feedback for our candidates. The candidates want to get feedback, and they want to know where they can improve and all those bits and pieces. And we can't get it and you can't get it. And it's a real frustration. I would change the question. Rather than ask for feedback, which is a real generic question, which will get you a generic answer, they'll say, sorry, we've seen someone else, or whatever it is that just had more skills. It doesn't help you in any way. Be specific. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate I've been unsuccessful. I would just like to know one thing, or one element of my CV that you really liked, one element of my interview that you think I could improve on, one aspect of my interview that resonated, even though I didn't get the job. Whatever it is that you actually want to find out. If you want constructive feedback in your next interview, then ask for it, but ask for one thing. If you ask for generic feedback, you'll get generic. You'll ask feedback, you'll get generic response. If you ask for specific feedback, it's much easier for someone to come up with one genuinely honest, truthful reason as to why you're unsuccessful, and rather than giving you a fob off of something generic, if you ask specifically. So most people don't do this, but it's how we get feedback from our clients. We'll say to our Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, I know X, Y, and Z have been unsuccessful, but can I just have one piece of information to why you selected A rather than B? And they'll nearly always give me something I can go back with. But if I ask for general feedback, they'll just go, well, they're off to a better person who got the job. And that doesn't help you or anybody else. So that would be my advice on feedback.
Nick, I'm conscious that quite a few people have been with us for a whole hour now.
Yes, maybe.
And
thank you.
The thing I was going to say is there anything else of any kind that you want to ask either of us at the moment? Just type it into the chat box, and then we can try and pick that up. But also, I'm available on LinkedIn. You can ask me, you can link up with me. Just mention when you do your connection that you first met me online here, and I'll connect up with you, and you can ask me or continue a debate and look at different things, I'm very, very happy to do that. Okay, and it looks like Nick's just given you his email as well, so he can act as my agent and pass things through to me as he feels fit. Yeah,
I'll put that on there because on my LinkedIn it's a follow. You follow, but if you go into the more section, you can send me a LinkedIn invite, and that's my email address to do so. So please do contact me. I know some of you already have off air anyway with some questions, and I'm very open to supporting you where I can with that. And I'm using LinkedIn as well, as Ted mentioned before. If you are looking for a position, tell the community you're looking for a position. Put the open to work thing on your status, and ask for help. Can anyone help me? Does anyone know anyone that's recruiting, or can someone put me in touch with someone that can support? And it should really help you guys.
Great.
Well, thank you for joining us all. My email is there. If you want to find more about HR or payroll recruitment services, either as a candidate or a client, then please come and visit me at that email link, or go to jjrecruitment.com. And if you want to access a copy of Ted's book, I will try and include, or if you've got a link to it, I can put it in the comments maybe.
Yeah, if you just go Ted Smith Human Resources A to Z on Amazon, it all pops up. That's what it looks like. I was showing everyone earlier when I was being cheeky and doing my sales pitch. It was aimed at people just joining the profession and coming in at the first. But it's interesting that I've got quite a few HR directors saying to me, actually, I'm learning from it myself and I'm buying it for my whole team.
There you go. It's very good. It's very good. But listen, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you found it useful. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do give us some feedback. We'd like to host some more of these as well as we go forward. We're trying to give everyone some information to help them in what is a very challenging time. So feedback be very welcome. Otherwise, I wish you a great end to the day and a fantastic evening, and good luck in whatever position you're in, whatever you're doing. Stay positive, and we'll look forward to speaking to you all again real soon.
Great. Thank you, guys. Cheers. Bye.